Okay, welcome to today's session. My name is Associate Professor Michelle Cull and I work at Western Sydney University in the area of financial planning. I would like to introduce you today to four of our presenters and our panellists. We've got Suzanne Maloney, Professor Mark Brimble, Amanda Kraft and Dr. Kirsten McDonald. But we're very excited to bring the event to you today on Theory into Practice Applying Academic Research. Before we begin though, I do have some housekeeping matters. If you could please make sure that your phones are turned to silent, but keep your phones out as you will need them. We will have some polling and a Q&A session towards the end. Hopefully you have all figured out how to use the polling and the Q&A on the app. If not, there are some instructions on the screen now. But don't start voting until the poll is open. Also, please note that this session is being recorded and you will be receiving CPD hours, so ensure that you have scanned at the door scanned your tag so that you can be sent your CPD certificate. Okay, just a little bit about today's session. Well, as you can see, we have a bit of a cycle on the screen here, and the session title is Theory into Practice, Applying Academic Research. And theory is central to the development of any profession, as many of you probably already know. But it's something that still is yet to be further developed here in Australia and more broadly internationally. Where there is a significant knowledge component, we want to ensure that this is something that is researched and we provide evidence to inform policy and practice. We have here today four of our leading researchers in financial planning in Australia, and you are going to be able to hear from each of them. And we're also hoping that you will be able to learn from the research and see how you can apply it in your everyday practice. I would also like to encourage you all to remain up to date with the research that is happening in financial planning in Australia, as we have the Financial Planning Research Journal. The Financial Planning Research Journal is the FAAA sponsored journal, and you can read a lot about the current research that's happening here in Australia and overseas in that journal. Now, there are two parts to today's session. The first part, which will involve some of your interaction, is the Shark Tank pitches. So you will hear from our leading financial planning academics today about their current research in financial advice and the practical application of their research. And then we are going to ask you to rate which research you would give your money to. As in, if you're aware of the Shark Tank television series, we have the sharks, you are the sharks, okay? And you will be able to choose which research you would invest in, and we will announce the winner towards the end of today's session. The second part of the session is a panel session with our presenters where we will discuss how we can work together in developing the profession, using the research and applying it and informing policy. So the theme of the Congress, as you're all aware, is growing together, and that will be the main theme for our panel session. To get things started, I think we might start with Suzanne Maloney, who is going to present her first pitch. I'll just introduce Suzanne. Suzanne is the Finance Discipline Lead in the School of Business at the University of Southern Queensland. Her current research is investigating retirement transition and specifically the invocation of work, home and financial planning. She is about to become an empty nester, with her youngest child completing Year 12 last week. Although the dog remains at home, not so quite totally free yet. Nonetheless, it does make a closer step towards retirement for Suzanne. Now, each presenter has 5 minutes to present their case, and towards the 5 minutes, I will interrupt our presenters to let them know that they have no more time left. The rules of the game were that each presenter were given only 3 slides for them to present in those 5 minutes. So get your app ready, and once you've finished hearing every pitch, you can vote for the one that you think is the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Good afternoon. Okay, and as Michelle said, I'm looking at my current research is retirement transition. And I guess the first thing when you do research is you work out what you know. What do we know? Well, we know that we have an ageing population. We know that government can't afford the likely pension bill if we don't change direction. We know that women have less superannuation than men. We know that we're on the verge of an intergenerational wealth transfer. We know that there's a heightened interest in superannuation from individuals in financial distress, as well as governments trying to fix budget problems. All of that is known through data collected by institutions and government at a macro level. So what don't we know? We don't know how people are making decisions on their retirement transition. We don't know how employment income is dovetailing into investment income to allow a meaningful retirement transition. We don't know what policy frameworks are helping or hindering that process. We don't know how intergenerational wealth transfer affects people's retirement decisions. We don't know whether women and men are similarly affected by the current social and institutional arrangements surrounding workplaces, government policy and family expectations. Intuitively, we can suppose that women and men are in different circumstances at retirement transition. Women have less superannuation, they are more likely to have spent time out of the workforce for caring and hence have less developed work networks and are more likely to be called on for parental care. And yet we need to know the answers to all those questions so that we can ensure that government have effective policy formulation, that workplaces retain their workforce, and that we ensure that we can give good guidance to our clients. And I guess this is where you come in. And as understood by Goethe, the general always bows to the specifics. So while all that general data that we at the macro level is important, we also need to know the specifics. How does a change in legislation affect individual choices? What social or cultural conditioning drives preferences? Why do some people continually act against their self-interest when making decisions? Now, you probably have the answers to those questions based on your years of watching people make decisions. Collectively, we need to unlock the insights from your knowledge by going beyond the anecdotes and by systematically examining the phenomena in real life, noting the subtle changes across settings. This is detailed and meticulous work. However, it's worth doing because it contributes to the global knowledge and theories that help explain and elevate the type of work that you do every day. So we need to go beyond the macro and incorporate the detail and examine the effect on people's lives of the decision making and the factors they take into account. Now, my current research on retirement transition, I guess, fits within that question of how do societies organise themselves to provide for the provisioning and flourishing of life. If I ask you to evaluate your life to date, what score out of 10 would you give it? How did you determine that score? The score you assigned was probably determined by a small sample of ideas that were immediately available to you, and not by a careful weighting of the various domains of your life. Attention is key. So my research is trying to hook into that intuitive decision-making research and to gauge the factors people consider in their retirement transition decisions. So 2 major theories are driving this current research: gendered organisations theory, which helps explain how people end up in the position that they do at that point in their life, And then behavioural finance theory, which is quite well known and based on the work of Herbert Simon. You may have heard of the finance theorist Herbert Simon, who put forward the concept of bounded rationality, Richard Thaler, who introduced mental accounts, Kahneman and Tversky's work on heuristics and biases, and Statement, who argued that beliefs and aspirations influence our decisions. So the behavioural research emerged in response to the failings of traditional economics to explain people's financial decision making. So that research encourages us to think about our own biases and our blind spots. For example, overconfidence, anchoring, regret avoidance, status quo bias, representativeness, etc. So for my research, I'm examining the factors that people are considering in their retirement transition decisions and applying the behavioural finance theory to help explain what they do. Retirement transition is a very complex decision with high levels of uncertainty and not easily undone. They are decisions that you see people make in your daily life, daily work, and therefore witness firsthand the accounts and effects. So you probably understand that the emotional state is determined by what we attend to.
Time.
So we need you in our research, I guess.
Thank you, Suzanne. Okay, our next presenter. You've got to know when to hold them. Our presenter is Professor Mark Brimble. Mark is a Professor of Finance in the Department of Accounting, Finance and Economics in the Griffith Business School. In his substantive role at Griffith University, Mark is the Dean, Learning and Teaching. He has a PhD in capital markets and active research interests in financial markets, sustainable finance, personal finance and finance education, financial literacy, and has publications in various national and international journals. When Mark is not at work, he enjoys camping and listening to 80s music. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Michelle. Afternoon, everyone. Hence the reference to the title, Kenny Rogers, if you haven't picked it up already. Hope you're all well. If I can first acknowledge my colleagues who are listed on the slide there in terms of the work we've been doing together in this space, and also our anonymous data partner, a large superannuation fund, and our friends at Iris who have been working on the project as well. Now I've got 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 40 seconds. Let me give you the first 15 seconds of that. Write down, think about, or type down, depending on what's in front of you, 2 things that you think retail consumers often mess up around investment decision making. Clock's on. So you've probably written down things like trying to time the market, poor information sources, an unprofessional or lack of professional advice in terms of informing that decision, overconfidence bias, panicking when my friend Tom Petrosky comes on the late night news talking in superlatives about what's happened in the market that day. Now, keeping those impacts in mind, what if that person making that decision is in a case or a scenario of significant crisis? How might that affect their decision making? Crisis theory would tell you that a crisis scenario significantly impacts on one's efficacy and their ability to make decisions. So take that for granted, and of course we've all seen that in the last few years. And you're probably, I would hazard a guess, thinking about investment decisions of the nature of buying and selling stocks on the market, changing your funds and your fund management, maybe moving money around between term deposits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what if both those decisions that are being made in an investment choice in a crisis situation are actually about superannuation, changing one's investment, which is meant to be, of course, a long-term investment. Indeed, as you're probably all aware, the government's currently trying to legislate the objective of super being about, and I quote, to deliver income for a dignified retirement alongside government support in an equitable and sustainable way. But what if superannuation fund members are actually starting to what you might colloquially refer to as trading their superannuation, and thus subjecting that capital to the same investment decision-making biases that we see in the more retail and consumer space? So what we've been working on is we got our hands on a database of about 63,000 superannuation switches from our data partner. And ultimately the headline is this. First of all, literature in the GFC found that members of superannuation funds started switching their super in unparalleled ways during that crisis. If you can see that chart, the yellow line is ASX 200, the blue bars I should say, represent member switches by volume. Above the line represents into growth or high growth funds. Below the line represents out of growth, high growth, balanced into essentially cash. So what do we see here? And the blue is members who switched multiple times, and the red is members who switched just once across our data window. So we see the volume of switches went up dramatically during that March-April correction in 2020 that you'll all be very familiar with. And equally, a dramatic switch into defensive funds, let's say. Most of it at the bottom of the curve, and then starting to come back after the market has returned. We don't often think about those decision-making biases in the context of superannuation because of its long-term nature, and often we lament lack of client or member engagement in superannuation decision-making. This, which I don't have time to go into, shows quite clearly the opportunity, the bad opportunity for members in this case, to burn their superannuation capital through bad switching decisions. Our work, into my third slide, we split the pool into single switches. Basically, during that correction period, 70% of member switches were a bad outcome from a financial point of view. Those that switched multiple times, 1/3 of the members did 2/3 of the switching. And 96% of those members had a very high probability of a bad outcome. Of the very small group, 3% who had a chance of a good outcome through that switch, it was only just above even odds, 56% chance of getting a good outcome. We've just finished a piece of work on ESG switches, which shows essentially that those members that were in ESG funds prior to the crisis were far more loyal to their fund and less likely to switch, which talks about the impact of value-based investing. So what does this mean? This means that three things essentially. One, we've got to do a lot more on consumer investment decision making. Two, we've got to be far more aware and proactive when members or clients are in a sense of crisis or a state of crisis. And thirdly, superannuation switching needs a relook. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Well done.
Okay, so you're probably beginning to see how important this research is. We're halfway through now, and there's still more to come. Very exciting. Okay, our next presenter is Amanda Kraft. And Amanda's topic is, does culture matter in financial planning? I'll just introduce Amanda. Amanda is an associate lecturer and academic program advisor for undergraduate students in accounting and financial planning at Western Sydney University. Her current research is from her PhD, which is investigating the application of intercultural skills to the provision of financial advice. Amanda is an academic affiliate member of the FAAA, and she has an interesting academic record, having studied Egyptian, archaeology or languages, as well as international business. And outside of work, you'll find Amanda at medieval fairs, reenacting daily life in medieval Scotland. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Michelle. As you can tell, I come from an atypical background. When I was doing international business, one of my favourite subjects was cross-cultural management. And I remember when studying it, thinking, isn't it unusual that we teach, say, international business students how to work in a multicultural world, but we don't teach that to other people? We live in a multicultural country. More than half of Australians are either migrants themselves or the children of migrants. So every one of us is engaging with people from other backgrounds every day. Why aren't we all learning a little bit about cultural value systems and how to work with people from different perspectives? So that's what got me interested in, why don't we teach financial advisors about cultural competence? And so I started talking to people and finding out, well, some people thought that it simply wasn't relevant, that most advisors are male from an Anglo-Saxon, Caucasian kind of background, and average age about 49. So they thought their clients were pretty similar to themselves, and so they didn't really have diverse clients that needed these intercultural skills. Now, as this is part of an ongoing piece of research, if you're interested in testing your own intercultural skills, can I recommend that you scan the QR code? It takes 5 minutes. It's all tick and flick. You don't have to write anything. So I interviewed 21 financial advisors and asked them, does this culture matter to you? Do you use it in practice? Do you think you have these skills? Do you think your peers have these skills? And the answer was, most people thought, even if they were aware of it, they didn't think advisors in general were. They didn't think there was a great deal of cultural diversity amongst advisors or clients, but it became a bit of a chicken and egg discussion. Is it because we don't have diverse advisors that we don't attract diverse clients? Or do diverse clients simply not exist? Are they not the kind of people who value advice and seek it? So there's a question there. Those who felt that they had cultural competence thought that they got it not from the workplace, but from some other life experience or previous occupation that they had. And then the major problem for my research came in when I asked them about culture. I was talking about this framework, cultural competence, is what I learnt at university, but everyone kept mentioning what I'd call non-national culture, not multiculturalism. They were talking about organisational culture, or differences between genders, or differences between age groups. And I thought, well, you're right. All of those things are cultures. Cultures are just beliefs, attitudes, values, and behaviours common to a group of people. And the group doesn't have to be from a specific country or ethnicity, right? It could be any kind of human grouping. So I thought, right, cultural competence isn't going to work for financial advice. I want to talk about cultural intelligence, because that's a skill set that does apply to any kind of cultural grouping. And one of the things I found out was that people thought, yeah, this might be something that some advisors might be interested in, but there's no current training on cultural intelligence for financial advisors. No one's telling you the difference between, say, being culturally aware and appropriate and being discriminatory and racist. So some advisors were really concerned that they didn't feel confident that they knew how to appropriately handle a diverse client because they were afraid that they were going to do it wrong. So that's where this research is going. So the QR code takes you to a test to evaluate your own skill in dealing with people from other backgrounds for any reason. But the other part of this work is to see, by surveying you and your peers, are financial advisors more culturally intelligent than other occupations? So far, we're neck and neck with the accountants, so the more data I can get, the better we score. I'm also interested in the future in developing workshops for cultural intelligence. It's a skill, it grows. It's not like IQ that necessarily is static. Cultural intelligence is proven to be something that you can develop. So we'd run workshops to grow that skill. The other application would be for your clients. We currently risk profile clients, but we don't values profile them. But there are value profile tools. You could test yourself and see where your value system must sit, test your clients, help use that as an evaluation tool for maybe the kind of clients you don't want to deal with, have very different value systems from you and perhaps don't suit your particular style of practice, but also help you understand your clients better and see why they have certain perhaps investment preferences or strategy preferences. And that's my time.
Thank you. Okay. Last but not least, we have Dr. Kirsten McDonald. Kirsten is a senior lecturer at Griffith Business School in the Department of Accounting, Finance and Economics, and she serves as the Program Director for Commerce Programs. Kirsten is also the co-chair of the Financial Planning Academics Forum, which was a great a great forum yesterday that took place here in Adelaide, a member of the Financial Planning Education Council, and an associate editor for the CFP Board's Financial Planning Review. Her research expertise is in personal finance, financial education, and has undertaken some recent consultation work, grants, and has some publications focusing on retirement outcomes. Kirsten also enjoys some social activities. She has begun playing social cricket and she loves cruising. If you would please welcome Dr. Kirsten McDonald. Thank you.
The value of advice, central to your client relationships, business value proposition, attracting new clients, attracting new talent to financial advice, and understanding the foundations of an emerging profession. So if it's so important, then why hasn't it already been done? Well, it has. We found over 1,700 documents on the value of advice. Their quality varied in terms of the data used, their method, and their theoretical foundation, or lack of. We distilled that list down to just over 500 quality documents.
Sorry.
And we interrogated those quality documents in terms of these questions. And we produced our own series of reports and academic articles addressing questions such as, what is value? How is value realised? What is the value of financial advice and financial advisors in a crisis? And where to from here? And what we found was a body of work that lacks coherence and synthesis. We found a body of work that's biased towards the US and somewhat towards Europe, that uses much information that has been around for a long time. So old data, pre-GFC data, when we need to know about the crisis and what's happening in the market for our clients now. So that drove us towards wanting to build a new conceptual framework and to test that not just in the existing context, but also in Australia, where it's very important to us here in terms of building this emerging profession. We found that your client relationships sit in a very complex and challenging financial environment. We looked at drivers and inhibitors, and through interviews with you and surveys, you strongly agreed that in the short run, the regulatory changes are value inhibitor. But you also strongly agreed that professional standard changes, including education, and this is before the 10-year rule came in, would be a value driver in the long run. We dug deeper into your client relationships, and you told us about what you do for clients. You told us about what you do for clients and how it impacts them, what their outcomes are. And we could see in the literature a strong framework around financial well-being and other forms of well-being. But the literature is really focused on the investment returns and the financial quantitative statistics. And we need to look more at the value that is offered through social, physical, and mental well-being to your clients. And that came out particularly in our crisis work during COVID. But we needed a framework to explain what you do, to explain those supports provided by advisors. And as we have in many emerging fields, we've drawn from other disciplines. So psychology, social support theory. We're able to explain not just the information you provide and the emotional support and social support that you provide to your clients, particularly during COVID, even through digital means, but to also look at how you appraise client position and keep them on track with behavioural coaching, and the instrumental support you provide, that is your strategic advice. So merging that psychological and financial theory, we came to a new conceptual framework of value. And you can see that in the middle there, the best value we can offer clients is around the type of advice that looks after all their types of well-being, and where you're providing all those types of support. This model can be adapted And obviously some clients don't need the same amount of social support as others, for example. So it could be suitable for piecemeal or one-off advice or digital advice. But this is really a model to test for comprehensive advice. The missing link is access to clients and client data. We need you to invest. We need funds to support the ongoing research in this space and to access that client data. Empowering Australians through the value of financial advice means unlocking the value and through our understanding being able to increase the number of advisors, increase the number of clients, improve your ability to deliver client-centric advice and improve the outcomes for clients, and most importantly, to actually establish a body of knowledge that drives the foundation for a true profession. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. Now it's time for you, the audience, to participate. So we're going to open it up. Before you vote, I don't think we'll open the polling just yet. We'll have some questions. So I'll allow 2 questions per presenter. I do have the iPad here, so if you pop your questions into the app, I can read those out. Or we do have a roving mic. If you want to raise your hand, we will get the microphone to you and we'll take questions from the floor. I'll just give you a few minutes. Yes? Okay, we've got a question down the front. When you take the question, if you could just say your first name and maybe who the question is directed towards.
My name's Paul, and I'm sorry, but I don't recall your name, but the gentleman on the panel, so fortunate there. Mark, thank you. You had the stats that showed that switches increase during times of crisis. Is the data available yet as to then what their performance outcome is? Like, what's the cost to the client of having done that switch?
Yes, so we could see in our data, line switch by switch, what the member switched into, out of, and the value of that investment, and we track the returns using pretty simple calculations on a daily basis to the end of our window. So the research, well, 3 research papers in this space now, in this project, do map that out. Ultimately, as I said very quickly before, those that switched in that 5-week period where the market went from the top to the bottom from mid-March to April, 70% of them ended up with what we called a bad switch, which essentially is defined for the purpose of our work as a lesser financial outcome in terms of their superannuation balance than what they would have had if they'd stayed where they originally were. So they didn't switch, in other words, over that particular time frame. What I didn't say at the end is our partners have just given us another database, this time 360,000 switches, which we're starting to work through, which expands the time backwards and forwards. So we'll get a bigger picture of the return impact of single switches along the time. And then quickly I'll just say, multi-switch is really complex from a modelling point of view, because as you can imagine, the timing, the ins and the outs, the splits between portfolios is really complex, but similarly less satisfying outcomes, if I could put it that way, arrive from that. Now, that doesn't mean every switch is a bad switch, but as I said in the talk, when you overlay decision-making bias with a crisis situation in particular, the odds, the probability of switches being in the member's favour are not great. So what can we do to protect that? If I remember correctly, the 4th quintile was up to, on the distribution of outcomes, was up to in the order of 50% loss of superannuation balance.
Okay, thank you. Great question.
So
we'll
yes.
just go to our next question, just here from the floor. Yes?
My name's James. Had a question for Michelle, I think, the last presenter.
Kirsten?
Recently in fact this morning there was a very good presentation on AI, which is a huge mega trend in the world and also a big important one for us as advisors. And one of the things they talked about was a wraparound, which is a data set that can be applied by use the neural network to apply to a situation so that when you ask an AI operator a question, it can use your data, like my data. Every SOA I've given since 2007, every name of every client, every balance, everything. That is an area that we desperately need research on to provide for government, provide for the FAAA. Everyone needs that. And yet there are some ethical considerations as well. That means that I can't give my data to anyone who can't virtually guarantee that it won't be used in the wrong way. And I'm just wondering whether your research will tap into that.
That is what we hope. We've been working closely to try and source data, and the challenge is certainly the ethics, because wherever you're sourcing the data from, it can be the original source, the third party, however you go about this, it has to be done correctly to secure the data. But certainly it is about opening up that power of the data to inform advisors. But certainly from what we've seen so far in the research, even if we've got numbers to measure quantitative things, it's the important data we get from you as advisors as well as from the clients, because we know it's not just about the return, it's not just about the costs, it's also about can they sleep at night, are they feeling satisfied in their life, and lots of other measures as well. But it's about having that whole picture covered by the data. It is very exciting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kirsten. I think we might move to Amanda for the next question. I've got some here on the iPad. Amanda, this question is from Renee. Are there any countries that do cultural intelligence well? And are you able to maybe share what the benefit was to them about that?
So was there any
Maybe if
countries?
what has been the benefit? So is there any country that's done cultural intelligence well, and what has been the benefit, if so?
I'm not aware of any particular country that has scored better in the data than any other country. I can only tell you that cultural intelligence, like the concept and the test, has come out of the US, but it was actually developed in collaboration with researchers from Singapore. So it was supposed to be a collaboration between East and West, so two very opposing kinds of dynamics. I can only say from the literature that I've read, it's really about which occupation scores better. At the moment, it's MBA students from the US. Not that I would have considered them typically an occupation, but that's the highest scoring group. And so anyone who did do the QR code, it was asking you to rate things out of 7. So those MBA students are getting 5s and 6s as an average out of 7, whereas I can tell you that the accountants are sitting around 4.9, and everybody in this room is averaging around 4.5, which is interesting.
Well, that actually answers one of the other questions we have here. But I have the second question for you. What about AI's alleged cultural bias? Is that a concern for co-piloting a co-pilot advisor who's using AI?
Sorry, it's hard to hear up here. Can you repeat the question?
The echo, I know. Is the alleged cultural bias using AI a concern?
I found it interesting. Perhaps I have an unusual perspective on it. I think we know from neurobiology that the human brain cannot process the volume of data that we see every day. We have to use heuristics, we have to use biases, assumptions, stereotypes to simplify the data for our own minds to process. So I don't know that it is humanly possible to remove bias from systems, because that's how human brains operate. They use simplification. We use simplification methods. The question is only, are you not questioning those biases? So when an AI is programmed, it is done by humans, and it will have the same biases human operators have. You need to be aware that it does those things, and you need to question, is that still appropriate in this case? So if for example, culturally, if you programmed an AI to provide, as we heard, I think we heard yesterday, an example was, what if you programmed an AI to provide advice and you asked it to write, I think it was a letter to a client from an East Asian country, and I think ChatGPT generated something that gave a very different kind of example for a client who was from East Asia. It used a sort of a Confucianism example, as opposed to a client from a Western country. It would give a very different, I think the clients who were African American were given their letter in what we call Ebonics, which is using sort of what the researchers termed it slang, but it's the slang that is common amongst African Americans. And the question was, well, isn't that a bias? Yes, it is. It is a bias, but is it necessarily in every case an inappropriate bias? It would be useful to know that if you are dealing with a client from a certain background, that they may prefer to be spoken to a certain way, but not everyone from that background will be. It's a starting point. That's what all stereotypes have. You know, they're a heuristic. There's an element of truth in there. There's some reason why our brains use it, but you can't just trust it 100% of the time. You have to be willing to be aware you have the bias and decide for yourself whether it's appropriate in that particular situation to follow it or question it.
Thank you, Amanda. I might just move to the lady who has another question on the floor here. Yes.
Let's try that again. Hi, my name is Kath. This is a question to Mark. If you're working with an industry fund which is allowing members to do all of their own transacting and doing their own switches, what is the ethical dilemma in allowing, people who may not have any education in doing those switches? Because I'd probably suggest that if you looked at what financial planners were doing in that time, we were holding. We weren't doing, all of these random switches. So what is the efficacy of these industry funds just allowing members to do anything that they choose, which is a bad outcome? They're going to know it's a bad outcome. Where is their, what would be the word? What's the outcome, and can anyone then make a complaint? Because they'd complain to financial planners if we made wrong decisions.
Sure. First of all, I wouldn't make the assumption that our data is from an industry fund, but I can't say any more than that. But to the core of your point, so it's a little bit hard to hear up here, but if it's about I think you said it was about the ethics and the efficacy of the outcomes. It's a dilemma in the sense that on one hand, who would argue to take away the choice from members about what they do with their superannuation? Equally, the point we're trying to make is that where is the limits to that, or what can be done to support member decision making? Whether it's through member education, whether it's through using technology, like some of which we've heard a lot about in the last couple of days. So when we know at a macro level there's heightened market volatility, we know that then induces behavioural biases to a higher extent. So what can a fund or the trustees of the fund do systematically to engage members in the discussion now at that point in time when they're more likely to make those choices, which our data shows is more likely to lead to a lesser outcome. Then what can we do even more incisively when we know where the fund might know what's going on, but through various things like semantic analysis, drawing data from multiple sources, you can work out that a member might be in a difficult situation themselves, even though it's not reflected in the markets. So our position is quite simply, we have to do better. And if the about to be legislative objective of super is going to be true, well, this is one thing that clearly is showing will impact on the retirement savings pool of individuals and households, and probably impact on those that are less financially literate, those that have higher propensity to panic in a general sense, but certainly around financial decision making in ways that we didn't expect we would see when we looked at the data. And that's it's one of the reasons why we've been working with IRAs, because they do a lot of events for superannuation trustees, so we're engaging in that conversation to see what could be done using technology or through other devices to essentially get better outcomes for members. But we're certainly not proposing remove choice altogether because we don't think that would be efficacious or ethical to your point. But we've got to do better than just letting it happen. And I should say, of course, if you haven't done it yourself recently, see how long it takes you to switch your superannuation on your mobile phone. If you've got an app for your superannuation fund, you can remember what the password is. People in this room would have financial literacy rights. You would know the terminology. You would know the different asset classes. If you've got a basic level of that understanding, I did it on my phone with my own super in about 60 seconds. That's how long it takes to get in, log in, find the investment page, find the switch page, pick what it is you want to switch your super to, done. Takes a few days for the fund to action it, of course. That's a really interesting context that wasn't there 5+ years ago, and probably will get even more interesting with technology evolution.
And great question. Thank you very much for that. I wonder at this point if we've got any questions for Suzanne. Yes?
Good afternoon. My name's Lincoln Holland. I'm a professional financial advisor, run my own practice. I'm also a member of Holmes Institute's academic board. My question is to Suzanne. Is your research taking into consideration, especially where I've observed that with blended families, children are actually staying home longer? So that is basically elongating and pushing out the parents' retirement plans. Is your research actually taking into consideration, that children are staying home longer?
Well, the short answer is yes. So I'm interviewing people to try to find out, what factors are influencing them. And I'm really interested in probably initially the workplace and how the workplace enables people to stay in workplace longer and what factors are tapping into that. But certainly responsibility to children and is a factor that a lot of people are considering, and whether they feel even the need to help them now, whether they'd like to leave an inheritance, and that whether they do or not really depends on whether they were left an inheritance. Or whether they think they will be. So I am looking at the whole family, because a lot of the times it's our family situation that drives our work choices. And certainly, for instance, what's come out in the research is when a male partner has been made redundant, the female partner, the wife, generally goes into panic as to whether they'll now have to retire. There's a pressure. But then if it happens the other way around, where the wife is made redundant, the husband doesn't think that, that they will need to retire. So just that sort of social conditioning of, oh, well, they'll expect me to retire now. There's a panic. So it's little things like that that are coming out. And certainly children are a big part of that, and responsibility. And parental care, actually. Parental care is becoming, I'm not sure whether you in the room have had to care for a parent into their old age and ultimately passing, but there is a big obligation on sort of the over 50-year-olds to actually do that parental care, and it can really impact on your ability to sort of beef up your super fund for your retirement. And who does that care is a big factor in that work-family interaction. Well, certainly a lot of people are staying in work longer. A lot of parents are staying in work longer and working further than they thought. Past their age, they thought they would work in, or have retired and have gone back in to help children. And that may be help children get into a home, because the house price obviously increased, but also a lot of children who want to actually skip into start a business of their own, and maybe they might be starting that business at, in their 30s, and so a parent will go back into the workforce to help fund that and float the business, I guess, to give their children a solid grounding. So certainly the obligations parents are feeling towards their adult children have grown significantly.
Okay, I think we'll have one more question for Kirsten. Kirsten, I've just lost it here. What are some practical applications of the research into the value of advice?
Look, there's many at the moment. If I take one example, though, where we dug deeper into what's going on in terms of value advice in a crisis, we sort of started out thinking about COVID and that being a crisis, a health crisis, but also financial and other types of crises involved as well, because it had so many flow-on effects to lost jobs and all of those sorts of things. So we were looking at your roles in these client professional relationships in that context. And it got us thinking more, though, about the fact it wasn't just about COVID. You're actually giving advice in a crisis nearly every day. Someone's lost a loved one, someone's had a total and permanent disability, and the list goes on. And we realised a fundamental part of your education is missing. You are doing a role that is, in a similar context, to first responders who are trained to deal with a crisis. And some of these people are in a mental health and other type of crisis. And if that's not there in the curriculum, then this work is actually providing evidence that we need more training for you in that area and that we need to take that on as educators and put that into the curriculum for you and get you prepared for that.
Okay, well, this has been great. And the questions that have come in, there's still some more we haven't answered, but maybe you can catch up a bit later over lunch with some of our presenters. But if you'd all just like to thank our panel members, presenters. Thank you. Okay, we might launch the poll now. If you would like to vote for the pitch that you think deserves more investment or that you think was most suited for financial planning practice. Did you want me to go through names? So we've got Suzanne. Yes, they are sitting in the same order. Yes, correct. And they can actually see it on the screen as well.
It's moving around.
All right, so I'm going to leave it open for
I can't see from here.
maybe 10 seconds.
Pretty close.
And when I say to stop, I won't look at the screen at all. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's stop the poll. Oh, Suzanne. Okay, very good. I've got something down there that has been...
Can't see that.
Can I take a photo of that? Maybe that will...
Very good. Let's see here. If you'd like to just stand up, I have a certificate for you.
Me?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Well
I feel
done.
like a student, a kid. I've won.
And thank you to Louise who pre-prepared these earlier. Thank you, Louise.
Thank
No,
you.
congratulations and well done. And you all did very well. Great pictures. I enjoyed listening to research, and answering all the questions. It is bringing us towards the end of today's session. What we did want to do was just maybe end with some closing remarks from our panellists. If I can just put to you one more question around how you believe we can work best with financial advisors in conducting our research so that we can actually inform policy and practice. So we might start with you, Suzanne, and then we'll just move down the line. Did you have a closing remark?
Well, I think certainly as I said in my pitch, we need to collectively work together, and we need to we need you as much as you need us probably to write it up and to influence that policy. Because policy, government policy, and legislation, there's always unintended consequences, and if we actually don't try to, inform government about likely consequences, and then cycle back around and get the research about what the effect was through you, because you're the one that with the data and you're the one that's doing this every day, there won't be any change. So I feel as if, and we've all, so it's a collective teamwork based on practitioners and academics through the theories, etc., to try to bring about positive change, I guess, to those seeking advice.
Great. And you, Mark, what would you like to add?
Thanks, Michelle. I guess I'd say, as an academic, I'd venture we get a lot of joy out of publishing our papers in academic journals. But if that's it, I think we're missing the trick, in the sense that the evidence is quite clear that a lot of academic research doesn't get read or cited often enough. In other words, how can it have impact if no one actually knows it's there, apart from those that wrote it and the editors of the journals that published it? So personally, I really like talking about my research with practitioners, with regulators, with all the stakeholders in the sector. My team, the people that I work with, we make a habit of trying to get our work in your face, essentially. We do at least a dozen, one a month, if not more, presentations to forums like this, to licensee, PD days, licensee conferences, et cetera, et cetera. So for us to have our work have value and impact on policy and or practice, we need you, one, to be aware about it, two, help us refine it, help us ask the good research questions that will be of use to you and your clients and consumers more broadly. Then I think we can all get a lot more out of it.
Thank you. And we're just at time, but Amanda and Kirsten, just a couple of last words.
I'll try to be quick.
Yes.
I think we want to hear from you. All research is just about being curious and asking questions, and we're not, the sole arbiters of what questions need to be asked or answered. So we would love to hear, if you have a problem, if you have something you're curious about, and you'd like to know more, and you'd like us to find out an answer for you, let us know.
And I'd say do that with an open mind, that it could be our students who are doing that work for you. We have lots of students who are in third year courses or moving into graduate diploma dissertations and PhDs, and so it's not just about our research, but it's the people we're training in the research, and that's the future of your profession. You need more people who are working in this space so that you have more educators to continue as people here might retire.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody. Another round of applause for our wonderful presenters. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
And thank you to all of you for being involved, for voting and asking such great questions. For those of you who we were not able to respond to questions, well, we'll pass them on to our presenters and they may try to respond in some way. Okay, thank you. Go and enjoy your lunch. Thank you very much.